Today, somebody wrote in the comments and asked the question of, what are some brain training? They said, what are some brain training tips for simpletons? But I think, if you're a simpleton, I'm a simpleton, right?
Yeah, we're all the same.
Yeah, we're all the same. So I think we can just, translate that as what are some simple brain training techniques,
That's
right?
a way nicer way of saying it. That's a way nicer way of saying it.
Yeah.
So simple brain training techniques. Wow, there's quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
So have you thought of an answer? Have you thought of something you want to touch on?
No.
So the first one that jumps to my mind is memory. Honestly, memory is one of the first things that jumps to my mind.
Language was one of the first things that came to my mind, but I thought, not everybody's interested in the language, so I thought I'd see what you said.
So I'm going to give a technique for memory. Mm-hmm. You give a technique for language. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating is how closely tied the two of them are.
Yeah.
So the biggest hack that CIA gave me for memory was understanding short-term memory and long-term memory. And understanding that short-term memory really is short. It's like 7 to 15 seconds, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if you want to intentionally pull something from short-term memory, someone's name, someone's phone number, some detail, if you want to intentionally remember that detail, you need to take very systematic steps to move it from short-term memory, 7 to 15 seconds, into long-term memory. And the way that you do that is through basic repetition.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just verbal repetition, but even the mental activity of repeating something to yourself mentally inside that 15-second window.
Yeah.
So when you meet someone new and you're like, "Hi, I'm Andy," and they say, "Hi, I'm Bill." Up until CIA, I always forgot people's names.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was like, "Oh, Bill, nice to meet you." And then I never think about Bill again. I'm more interested in what Bill's talking about.
Right.
Well, now I know. I've got to remind myself of Bill's name. So in my head, I have to tell myself, I'm listening to Bill talk right now. This guy talking is Bill. Bill likes to eat at Carl's Jr. Bill has 2 daughters. And I speak out. I try to practice saying his name. Bill, let me ask you a question. Right? Bill, let me follow up. Bill, you made a really good point right there. Because every time I say his name, I'm working it into my long-term memory. So I mentioned this example probably about 45 seconds ago. And about right now, everybody listening still remembers the name.
Bill. Yep.
Because it's worked its way into our long-term memory. And that was so powerful to me when CIA taught me that.
Yeah. And it flows right into language learning because I've been learning language since I was a child, right? And now we have our own children who also learn language. And when I was a child, I never thought about it. I spoke English, Spanish, and Japanese. And then I went to school, and in school, I studied Spanish formally. And when you study a language formally, there's a lot of book work and grammar, and maybe you practice speaking, but it's a lot of writing and reading. And so for me, language learning, official language learning in the beginning was all academic, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's easy for me to read. It's easy for me to write and recall. And, when I see it on the paper, that's easy. But speaking was always the hardest part for me. And speaking is arguably the most important part when you're first learning a language. And so the same concept of getting the words, getting the new vocabulary words into your memory, it all has to do with usage, right? You need to hear yourself using the words in context as much as possible. So you walk around the house talking to yourself, right? You pick one thing, learn 5 words a day, and, learn words for things in the kitchen. And then you walk around your kitchen and you just keep repeating it over and over again for like 15 minutes, right? Every day you build and build and build on these conversational skills.
Because there's an element of muscle memory that you also have to train in.
Yes, your mouth has to get used to forming the new words because every language uses the muscles in their face differently, which is so fascinating.
Which is why it is that you can read something and understand it, or hear something and understand it, and you just can't get the words out of your mouth because your tongue and your lips and your teeth and your jaw are not trained yet to work together.
Right. So I have you learned Chinese early on.
Yeah.
But when I started trying to learn Chinese, when we were at the agency, it was so difficult because the tones are so different, and my ear wasn't quite pitched to it yet. And it takes time of listening and speaking, right? The same thing happens to me with French because there are guttural sounds and there are nasal sounds, and I'm not used to making those sounds in English. Yeah. And so just like you said, the practice and getting your face to make those noises over and over again.
Well, we both learned Thai as well. And I remember that when we were learning Thai, I had a much easier time with it because it is also a tonal language.
Correct.
And I could pull from my knowledge and my experience with Chinese. But even then, I studied Chinese academically for 2.5 years. And I could draw the tones and I knew what the tones were supposed to be, but I could never recreate them naturally until I actually went to China. And after 6 weeks living and working and going to school in China, where you're immersed in the tonal usage, that was really when it clicked for me.
Yes.
And that's when I stopped being self-conscious, because that's what it really was. For me, the term that I put on language learning, whether it's right or wrong, is self-conscious. I felt self-conscious making some sing-songy sound that I didn't know if it was right or wrong. And I didn't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
So I would just not make the sound at all when I spoke. Right? And I feel like that's what happens with so many of us is we become self-conscious. What if I say it wrong? What if my grammar's wrong? What if somebody laughs at me? What if I use the wrong word? What if I try to say bean and instead I say but? Right? People get worried about that, so then they don't even try. And that was for sure my experience with Chinese. And having been forced to use my Chinese in China, it's why when I had to use my Thai in Thailand, I really didn't care how many times I said but when I asked for beans.
You did get laughed at quite a lot by the
lot.
people.
But that's a whole culture where they basically take every negative emotion and they portray it as laughter. So you never really know whether they're actually having fun or if they're sad or if they're mad or if they're furious, because they all just laugh. And that's a very Buddhist way of handling confrontation.
I think they mostly thought it was cute because you were trying.